migrants. Can you tell us more about those plans, what the options are, who would be detained, and whether military personnel might be involved?
Well, President Trump did talk about that a little bit at the ceremony. Just talked about the fact there might be some resources that could be established for the worst of the worst at Guantanamo Bay, and that's something that he is evaluating along with our team at the Department of Homeland Security. But today was really about Laken. It was really about these families in the United States that have lost their loved ones, many times their children. And it was so special to see President Trump recognize that, talk about their children and tell their stories, and then to see the bipartisan support of this bill being signed into law. Now when we have individuals come into this country and break our laws, commit crimes of theft, larceny, assault, murder, rape, they will be detained by the Department of Homeland Security and turned over for prosecution. And that's a change from the last administration. And I think that everybody there, Republican or Democrat, we're all Americans. And we all recognize that this bill was necessary, and it was so special that it is going to help us always remember Laken and those who've been lost because of these tragedies.
Yeah, listening to her mother speak was especially moving. I do want to ask you, Secretary, what protections does this law have in place to protect folks who may have entered the country illegally but have since obtained permission to stay temporarily?
Well, this bill is all about those who commit crimes, that they will be detained. So this bill specifically addresses situations where people's lives were lost because criminals, dangerous criminals, were allowed to be released back into the United States to perpetuate more crimes. So it also allows states that to go after civilly federal officials that let these criminals go, that turn them back on our streets to endanger more families. So I'm really thankful that that was added through the amendment process, and that it is something that is a tool for states to hold some accountability to the federal officials that allow these things to happen.
Well, I ask you about the protections because opponents have argued that they're not actually spelled out in this bill. So in theory, if someone was simply arrested for shoplifting, just arrested, not convicted, their case wasn't adjudicated, they could be detained without bond for the duration of their proceedings. Does that raise concerns to you about due process?
Well, what we need to remember is all these individuals came into our country already, broke our federal law. They broke our federal law, and then they perpetuated another crime. So they will be detained, and they will get due process, and they will go through our judicial system, and we will make sure that when they commit these types of crimes, they'll be held accountable to that. So this bill is moving forward in a way that has Republican support, bipartisan support. It was great to see senators. It will be amazing to...
As far as
go ahead.
What the bill spells out, though, these aren't individuals that have been determined, some of them, to have committed crimes. You could simply be accused of shoplifting, suspected of shoplifting, and then get deported. So how does that fit into what you're describing? Because they could be detained almost indefinitely until their status is adjudicated.
Well, I think if you look at the situations, they've already broken a law, then they've come in and perpetuated and been accused of another broken law, and they will be detained until that is moving forward and we have a resolution to that process and that crime. You know, this is a bill that people have agreed on that is necessary in this country because of what we saw happen under the Biden administration. So it has wide support. The president was proud to sign it today. And these families that lost their children to tragedies, they were thrilled to see some results from those tragedies come for the better good of the United States of America.
I want to ask you about how this sort of detainment is going to be funded. There are some estimates that have this new framework for detainment costing something like $83 billion over the next 3 years. The bill doesn't outline how exactly that's going to be funded, so I wonder, where is that money coming from?
Well, to start standing up some of these detainment centers, we're using operations and budget that we already have in place, but we will need more help. We will need more dollars from Congress, and the reconciliation process is going to be utilized to have that debate on the Capitol Hill. We've got senators and representatives that recognize that in order to do this and to fix the situation that the Biden administration perpetuated, we're going to need the resources, not only to incarcerate and go out and get these dangerous individuals off our streets. We're going to have to detain them, put them through a process to repatriate them back to their home countries. And for me, we really need to focus on fixing our legal immigration system as well. I need more resources to have our judicial courts and immigration courts resourced up, that we have more judges, so that when people want to come to this country legally, they can do that in a timely process.
So how many of those that have been arrested since these crackdowns began have been felons? How many have had felonies versus misdemeanors? In other words, how many folks have actually been convicted of crimes versus how many of them have just been in the country without documentation?
Many of these individuals that we have done targeted operations to go find and to bring into custody do have felonies against them. They're the murderers, the rapists, the worst of the worst. And I think you've probably heard many other people talk about the fact that these are going to be the worst first, will be the ones that will be held accountable and pulled off of our streets. And it was amazing when I was in New York City yesterday, just the community members that were constantly walking by a lot of these individuals and officers that were going after these bad criminals were saying, thank you. Thank you for making our streets safe again. Thank you for being here and making sure that we can walk our kids to school again safely, that we can go to work safely, and that our community will be better because of what we're doing here today.
But undoubtedly, you said many, but it doesn't sound like you have a specific number for how many have actually been felons and how many have had misdemeanors for not having documents, something that in the United States is prosecuted as a civil matter.
Well, I'll tell you that what we are doing is targeting those felons, targeting those that have violent acts and have broken crimes, but also when we're going into these situations, perhaps into an apartment, to get somebody that is on our list that needs to be removed from that community to make it safer, there are people that are in that apartment with them. We're talking to all of those as well and vetting to see who they are. Sometimes we have found apartments and facilities that have children and families there, that we're talking to them to see who they are and make sure that they aren't children who are being trafficked, that they're truly with family members, that they're in a situation where they're hanging around dangerous criminals. We want to make sure that they're not people who are a part of that chain that is funneling drugs or weapons or perpetuating some of these crimes in our communities. So that evaluation and those numbers is changing every single day based on who's around these criminals and who's around those dangerous individuals.
But as you are conducting these sweeps, there undoubtedly have to be occasions where someone who has not committed a felony is getting swept up, and perhaps that's a person who has been law-abiding and who has been in this country perhaps for decades and who contributes through paying taxes. Do they also deserve to be deported if they've lived most of their lives in the United States?
You know, every situation is different, and I won't speak to every single situation and every single operation we've had where our officers have gone out into these targeted operations. But what I will say is, of course, we do the due diligence that law enforcement always has been. We ask questions, we see who they are, we ask for their paperwork, we ask for their ID. We're just making sure that these individuals are people who love this country, who obey our laws, and that the scales of justice are applied equally. You know, we expect our American citizens to obey our laws. Even people who aren't our citizens should be obeying our laws. And that's the process we're going through that law enforcement always has.
Sure. Some of those folks may have had status at one point, but then lost it. And I do wonder, for example, the administration announced this morning that TPS protections for Venezuelans are being rolled back. By our count, there's something like 500,000, more than 500,000 that stand to be affected. By Saturday's deadline, are they going to lose protected status? Does that make it more likely that they will get deported?
Well, you know, one of the decisions that was made recently is that in the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas put in place an 18-month extension of the temporary protected status. I rolled that back. I rolled it back to the 6 months that it always has been, and he really put that in place to tie my hands, my ability to keep integrity into this program. So this program has been in place for years. We're going to make sure that it's used properly, and that's the president's heart and desire as well. So when the president gives a directive, the Department of Homeland Security will follow it, and we're going to make sure that those who come in under a program, under a visa, and are here in this country, that they're following the rules of that program. That's been abused over the years, and it needs to be fixed. To those folks who are in violation of these programs, they need to recognize that they're accountable to that. They agreed to follow the rules when they came, and that they need to be held accountable when they don't follow them.
But if they are following the rules of a program that you have deemed to be illegitimate, does that still put them at risk of being deported, even if they are following those rules?
You know, we are getting direction on how this works from the direction of the President of the United States, and he is pausing this program to reevaluate. We know that it has been abused in the past, and that there's many people from other countries that are affected as well from this TPP program, and we're going to make sure that we fix it so that it's utilized in the right way.
Lastly, Secretary, I do wonder if there are protections in place for people who are here legally. I think of family members of my own that don't speak English very well, hardly at all. Are there protections in place to prevent against racial profiling?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. These folks can live in peace knowing that all of their willingness to come to this country legally and to be here, we welcome them with open arms. That's America's story and something that we're proud of. So I understand that the American people clearly sent a message in November that they wanted this country to be a nation of laws. That's what the president's following through on, and transparency is going to be our hallmark. People need the answers to their questions, and that's what I'm here for, is to make sure that they understand that we love this country. We want our citizens to feel comfortable and at peace and to have their safety and their streets back again.
Secretary Kristi Noem, we have to leave the conversation there. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective. I hope to chat again soon.